On the bench today, I've got a couple Husqvarna chainsaws. One's a 460 Rancher, the other's a 240. These are from a family member, and all I know is they don't run, so no backstory, but I'm gonna go through the steps that I know to diagnose these, see if I can get them back up and running. Well, this 460 Rancher doesn't even attempt to start, so 2 of the 3 screws are gone already on top, and this one's loose. Let's take off the top. Let's see what we've got inside. The connections look like they're intact on the kill switch. Here's the throttle. Yeah, that's doing throttle things. Pull the choke, sets it. Yep. Everything looks normal as far as a linkage point of view. I think what I'll do next is pull the spark plug and check the compression. Well, 2 strokes run on fuel, spark, and black magic, so we'll take the compression reading with a grain of salt, but giving a few strong pulls, I was able to see 60 PSI on my gauge here, so no obvious problem there. The next obvious thing to check for is spark. So I've got an inline spark checker here, and I'm actually gonna push in the decompression just to make cranking a little easier. You saw that, right? Well, I could see it at least. There is some spark. Okay, to begin checking if it's a fuel problem, I'm gonna squirt a tiny bit of starting fluid into the cylinder directly, and we'll see if that lets it start. Oops. It's always good to aim it the right direction. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a tiny bit or a lot bit, but let's see what she does. Getting absolutely nothing, even with some fuel squirted in there. All right, I gave this thing a good old diet of starting fluid right into the carburetor with the throttle open so that it can make its way inside. Tried it in the standard position, choke position, choked off, but throttle still in high position, and didn't get anything anywhere. So I'm back to thinking maybe it is a compression issue, or it could have to do with sealing of the engine, intake, exhaust, or the lower bearings. Could all be sources of air leaks. So looks like I'm taking this thing all the way apart, and this is where we depart from maybe what a shop would do. Shops have all sorts of tips and tricks, and they can often do diagnosis with a lot less disassembly. But in this case, I have a request because it's a family member. They'd like me to go through the whole saw and find if there's any issues, the one that's stopping it from running right now, or other issues that need to be addressed. So I want to give it back to them fully functional, and to do that, it's easy enough for me just to take it all to bits. For the next step, I'm going to take off the clutch. To do that, I'm going to use the trick you've probably seen, which is to fill the cylinder with some, I might get some rawhide, kind of like a lace. I want to stuff that cylinder full so that I can crank the piston up and have it jam against there, and then I'll be able to turn off the flywheel as well as the clutch wheel. So that's next. Okay, so there's the piston at the top. You can see it going up and down right there. I'm just gonna turn it till it goes to the bottom, and I'll stuff in this rawhide, as much of it as I can fit, so that when I turn the crankshaft, it just binds up on this stuff. Won't damage anything, but it does provide an easy way to stop the crank from rotating. And now, it stops there, that direction, there, that direction, and now I can put tools to the clutch and the flywheel. And the way to get this flywheel off is to use a punch or something that can positively interlock with these little notches here, and hold the punch and hit it with a big hammer. I always recommend a bigger hammer rather than swinging harder right into that tab there or on the other side, and then it spins right off. And the flywheel comes off conventionally, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Getting it off of the tapered shaft is much more tricky, but generally it involves getting something to pry underneath here, not so much that you're prying it off, but a tool just to put some pressure upward on that, and then it's a matter of just shocking this with a hammer blow. You have to be careful about where you hit it. There's obviously, on one side, there's a magnet. You don't want to be knocking those magnets. Those are what go across the ignition coil. But you can hit in the middle, and you can hit on this other side, the sort of the counterweight side. And can't see it, can't turn it around because there's that rawhide on the piston, but hit it on either of these sides, just avoiding those magnets while there's pressure upward, and it'll pop right off. The engine on these Husqvarnas is attached to the plastic case with these 4 bolts in the bottom. So once you've got most of it loose, you can take those out. I'm gonna see if my screw gun can get it. I'm not sure that it can. No, that's gonna need some torque. Okay, next you got to release the carb from these little rubber holders that it hooks into. So you've got the little tab coming off the side of the carb assembly, and it goes into like this little rubber loop on both sides. And now everything should be free. little bit messy, but there you go. And I see a pretty nasty gasket down there, so high chance that there's some leakage going on there. I'm gonna disconnect this fuel line. All of this is gonna get so detail cleaned, hell, I might put it in the dishwasher, so I'm not too worried about cleanliness here, but you can see it's good and dirty. These gasket ends here, they have to just perfectly mate up with this rubber seal. You're really fighting very, very slim tolerances here when it comes to air escaping or being pulled into the engine, and neither is good. Well, with a little wipe down on the piston, it's pretty obvious what's happened to this engine. You can see these deep, deep gouges. This is the intake side, it looks okay, but as you move towards the exhaust side, that's where it gets really deep, and you can see this thing has, this is run hot. The piston ring, yeah, the piston ring is stuck. It should be floating and able to expand to fill the cylinder, but it's definitely scored up and not moving. Then let's see on the exhaust side of the jug. My camera doesn't want to focus on the shiny parts, but you can see the scoring up above that port and some below it as well. So this saw has probably run hot, more than likely. It went lean. That could have come from an air leak that was letting extra air in. That lets it run lean. Lean is hot. Hot is scored up piston. Scored up piston is no compression. So we got, what was it, 60 PSI in the gauge, and I was willing to allow that given we were just hand cranking it, thinking it would go up higher under running condition, but the more I think about it, that's probably indicative of poor piston seal. People actually do like kind of grind and resurface and hone these. This one feels pretty bad. Now it's not nearly as bad in the jug as it is on the piston. Factory parts are available. They're not too expensive, but then there's the Chinese replacement parts, which are dirt cheap. And I've actually had good experiences with them. They can work for you. So I'm gonna look into prices. It may be worth just getting a whole new jug and piston, but also obviously we wanna do seals and gasket at the same time. And pretty soon that could turn into new carb at the same time if it was responsible for the lean condition. It could add up, or it might be real cheap. It just means that I need to go search it out. Finally got the carb all apart. Well, it's not completely apart yet. There's still pieces left to take apart, but this carb assembly is wild. I don't really know if there's a problem or not here, but I do know that carbs like to be dirty, and cleaning never hurts. So I'm just basically gonna clean the snot out of all this stuff, then disassemble, clean some more. I'll actually be able to see if any of these boots are cracked or have leaks. I mean, all it takes is one little tiny tear in anywhere in this intake that lets a little air in, and that can totally ruin your day. And here's how it ended up. That's a 460 Rancher's worth of parts in there. I've got to clean these up next so that I can inspect things and see where problems may lie. I think I have a way of doing that pretty easily though. Everything but the air filter. Well, I went ahead and got a new piston kit and a new seal kit. I've decided to reuse the existing cylinder. It's not actually scratched up as bad as it looked initially. You can't feel anything with a fingernail, but I'm gonna use a new piston with the existing cylinder jug. Now, online you can find lots and lots of 47 millimeter pistons with a matching cylinder. I actually needed a 49 millimeter piston to go with the Rancher 460. Apparently the reason you find so many 47s out there is that that's what was used in, I think, the 450, 455 versions of the saw, and it's probably simpler to just manufacture lots and lots of those kits. And people do put them into their 460s. That slightly downsizes the displacement. Long way of saying I want to keep the original displacement and use the original cylinder, so I had to go get this 49 millimeter piston, which I got from an eBay company called Duke Saw Salvage. And this looks like a pretty nice unit. New ring, new wrist pin, and of course new clips. Piston and crank are reassembled with the new parts. I actually used an engine assembly lube on all of the bearing surfaces and the seal surfaces underneath where the seals ride on the crankshaft milled surface. And that's just to basically give everything lubricant ahead of the lubricated fuel getting into all those spots. Now I just need to install it in the crankcase. Now the crankcase is extremely clean, and the seal surfaces also extra clean. So I'll just drop this in here, hopefully. There we go. And I should mention that the arrow on the piston, you'll often see these arrows, that's basically the direction of airflow. So carburetor back here through to the exhaust this direction. And of course you want your tapered side of the shaft on this, which is the left side of the saw. That'll take the flywheel and starter. And then the non-tapered side over here is for driving the chain. So with that done, it's a matter of installing these seals in the front and in the rear. And I'll come back and carefully nudge them to be close up next to the seals on the crank and give basically a close-up inspection, make sure everything's fitting really tightly. There you go. So you can see it's tucked down in there, and it's about, you know, half exposed and half down in the crankcase recess. So you want that on all four sides. That's just critical for sealing the engine and preventing any air leaks. So it's time to mount the cylinder on the piston, and the way I'm doing it, I already have the carb and the exhaust connected, and I'm going to install this whole thing as a unit. This should work for me. The only thing is I did pull out this fuel pickup hose a ways so that I can connect that when this is sort of halfway down, and then once I'm finished, I can just reach in, grab the fuel pickup, and tug that line back. The goal here is to basically set it straight down, pause, attach the fuel line, and then make just one motion down to touch the bottom of the crankcase only once, and not ever have a chance to pick up these seals or dislodge anything. I've cleaned out the cylinder first with carbon choke cleaner generously, and then followed up with some WD-40, so there's light oil over everything, and then some engine assembly lube all smeared around the top of the piston, focused on this area where the ring will have to compress as it slides into the bottom of the cylinder. So impossible for me to film, bring you back when I'm either successful or stuck. This is actually going really well. Here I'm kind of half installed. The piston is up inside the cylinder skirt, but not all the way down. And now I have room to attach this fuel line, and then I'll continue by installing it all the way down. It's all the way down, seated on the lower crankcase, and now it's a matter of turning it upside down, not letting this drop out, and installing these lower crankcase bolts. Okay, these bottom crankcase bolts, I'm going to apply some blue Loctite, which is a good choice for threading into aluminum, and they need about 10 foot-pounds of torque applied. So I'll be using my torque wrench to put those in a diagonal pattern. Next up, we can put the flywheel back on. Look for the key cast into the flywheel, matched up with the slot and the tapered crank. I turned mine to be vertical just to make it a little bit easier. Set it on there, and as you turn it back and forth, you'll feel it fall into place. Then the flywheel nut. This needs to be torqued to about 25 to 30 Newton meters, or about 20 foot-pounds. And this turns conventionally righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. If you are using the rawhide trick to stop the piston from rotating, do be aware that in certain cases, the piston can shear off some of the rawhide. So just look inside there and make sure there's not any leftover leather hanging out inside the cylinder. And the ignition coil can go back in here, and it needs to be separated from the magnets on the flywheel by about the thickness of a business card or like a piece of heavy card paper. So just find something you can use to stick in between the two, and you can turn the magnets into place, and then just tighten this down. And when the wiring's all finished, this is what it should look like. You've got the ignition coil connected with the spade connector, as well as the ring terminal down there on the base. Blue and black wires travel over through this slot over to the carburetor area, and that blue wire sets in the kill switch just like that. Before going too much further, I'd like to see if it actually starts, so I've reattached the starter cover and installed the spark plug, priming the carb with some fuel since it was completely empty. Wow, so it's running better than I could have imagined. Choked it, pulled once, twice, I think, before it caught. And then from there on, without choke, started right up. Ran at high idle, decompression valve came out, everything as expected. Smells kind of funny with all the WD-40 and moly grease that I had in there, but I think after running 5 minutes or so, especially under load, I think it'll be right back to normal. So piston, new ring, new seals, of course, as well, and seems to run really well now. It's time to resuscitate this bar now. I can tell by looking at it that it's been run really hard on this side. When you've got this blue side with all the paint removed, that's how you know that it's gotten really, really hot. And I can also tell the bar hasn't been flipped or only been flipped and used a little bit because there's almost no paint missing on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and regrind basically this groove to be square with the side of the bar and clean it out and make sure that it's still tight enough to hold the 050 chain. So a couple tools that I use to do that. Obviously I need a bench vise, just a little square file to true up the sides. This is a nice little scraper that just gets the gunk out from inside the slot. But most importantly, I really like this thing. This is a little right angle file. It lets you hold the file at just a 90-degree angle to the bar. Now it's important that the side burrs are taken off first, but once that's done, this tool lets you go along and square up the surface that the chain rides on to the side of the bar. So I'm gonna get started with that now. I can feel the burr on here underneath the file, and then I can feel when it gets smooth, it like just skates right off. That's when this burr is gone. Okay, that's that side down. I need to do the other side, and then both sides on the other side of the bar as well. So 1 of 4 done so far. By the way, these are HyFlex gloves. I really like these. I'm not affiliated at all, but these have been what I've been wearing recently. They're like a fancy garden glove. There's nitrile on the bottom and like a fabric on the back for breathability, but these are rated for anti-abrasion and anti-cut, so they're perfect for this kind of everyday job. Really enjoying having less cuts and scrapes on my hands since I've been using these. I'll put a link in the description, but like I say, I'm not affiliated in any way. All right, I've got the slot cleaned out and I've got the sides of the bar free of burrs. So there's nothing preventing parallel surface right here. And that's important for the next step, which is to use this tool, which trues up the top surface of the bar. And so I'm just gonna do long, straight filing strokes on either side. First one obviously starts pretty rough, but it gets better as the bar gets trued up. So we can start about there. I'm using firm pressure on these first strokes and then I'll lighten up later. This is where it's taking off the bulk of that material. Okay, I'll do the other side. Once you get the major burrs off, you'll start to see little strings come off, and that's where it's just taking just the tiniest little cut, and that's when you know you're getting close. There they are. You can see them kind of flying off. That's also the point where I like to use some light oil. So I'll spray a little WD-40 on here, and that will help the filing process go just a little bit more smoothly. Okay, there's the first really smooth stroke. So I can tell that I'm getting very close. So with the bars totally cleaned up and ground true, I've pulled out every little bit of metal out of the slots and cleaned out with WD-40. The sides have no burrs, the chain surfaces are parallel and true to the bar. The last step is to lubricate this chain roller on the end, and for that I use this special grease injector. Most bars have a little hole here on the end on both sides that let you lubricate that roller. So I'm just gonna squirt some grease in without removing the tool, because grease will come out. I'm just gonna rotate, squirt, rotate, squirt. Nice thing about this is it's also pushing out any rust or dirt or metal that's trapped in there. Okay, so this one is all good. It'll make a mess the first time that it runs, but that's fine with me too. Rather have it over lubricated than under lubricated. That's the first bar for the Rancher 460. Let's do the same thing with the smaller one for the 240. All right, getting into this 240. Someone already did some work on it, it looks like, because it's like the chain brake's disengaged from this chain cover, and the chain cover is dislodged, the bar is loose. So I'm gonna take it apart the rest of the way and see if I can get it to do anything. But so far, a couple cranks have given it no dice. So it turns out this one runs, just not very well. You can hear it kind of cycling. Oh, there it died. Well, Perfect timing. When I was revving it, you could hear it kind of oscillated, like it was not quite at the right mixture or something else going on. I think what I'll do with this one is play with the carburetor. I think I'll basically figure out how many turns it's got on the low and high, write that down, and then reset to a baseline, and then see if I can get it to run any more smoothly. I think I'll also check the spark plug, just look at it to see if it has any indicators on it. What else can I do? Obviously air filter, but yeah, it's just running rough, so I'm guessing carb mixture. Aha, well this one has a different problem. It's fine in this position, it's fine in this position, but if you turn it up, watch that seam. You see what's streaming out of there? Looks like we have a fuel leak. Start us off and you can see a little bit more. Is this supposed to wiggle like that? What's that attached to? What does that thing do? Right underneath is where the fuel is spilling out, so kind of suspect of how that's fitting. All right, so here's a tip. On most saws, the throttle piece can just come right out. In this case, it's got a little hook on here, so I've got to kind of fish it out of there in order to separate the two parts of the saw. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out. So after fighting for a little while, I finally just took the side of the handle off, and now things should be pretty straightforward. There we go. Just take the throttle trigger off and we're free, I think. These two parts should not be connected anymore. All right, and they're not. Okay, so getting closer to the source of our fuel leak. So I was wondering what this piece did that was kind of loose. Well, turns out that is connected by this little screw here. It looks like it'll be a little access panel. Take that out. Looks like this should come off. All right, now we can access the carb and see a little bit closer. Looks like it's coming from a seam. Well, that would be the worst case. Oh, nope. Hooray! It was just on the seam. There's a fuel hose that is disconnected from its barb. That makes sense why it's leaking and maybe why it's running poorly. Can't imagine it would run at all without that, but let's connect it up, see what kind of improvement we get. Once I revved it wide open, you could see the high-speed jet took over and it seemed to run okay then, but it's just revving up, throttling from nothing or from idle up to high speed, seems to stumble. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and check what the settings are on the carb, see if I can see where it's at and change it to factory spec and go from there. What I found was that the low-speed jet was far too rich. The factory setting is between 1 to 1.5 turns out from closed, and this was about 5.5 turns out. So far too rich, and restoring the factory settings cleaned up the stumbling that I had experienced. Okay, we have the main part of the saw together. Here's the original sprocket that was on there. You can see it's good and worn out. It's got lots of deep ridges in each of the sprocket teeth. And I'm going to replace it with a new one, which, I don't know if I believe this, but it's advertised as being specifically for a low profile 3/8 pitch chain, and that's what we're running. Now, depending on where you ask, Oregon and others say, yeah, it's okay. I think Husqvarna itself says it's okay to run a low profile 3/8 on a regular 3/8 sprocket. I'm not sure if this really is a low profile sprocket. It looks pretty much the same as the original, which is also fine with me, but you can see that where the teeth are worn out on the old one, you got fresh teeth surface on this new one. So that's really the only difference there. Fresh bearings, so let me get lots of grease into that. I'm using some of this engine assembly lubricant with moly and graphite. It's good sticky stuff. The idea is just to get it kind of seated, and then it'll tighten itself. There we go. All right, I've got a clutch. What's next? Okay, it's time to work on the 240's clutch cover / chain brake mechanism. This is the cover that came on the saw. It had a broken chain brake band here, and that must have been rubbing, causing a lot of heat, because this is all melted in here, and also this little actuator that the handguard index is on to actuate the chain brake, it's actually cracked in 2 places here, and so it needs to be replaced. Long story short, I picked up a used, good OEM clutch cover chain brake mechanism. I've got a new band to go into it, and it came with a good actuator mechanism. So it's a matter of swapping in the band and the springs and making one good cover out of both of them. The other good news is that the chain tightening mechanism on this one is a lot smoother than the one that's coming off as well. So that's a little bonus. The chain brake band sits in here. There's kind of a slot for it in the plastic, and then this wraps around this actuator mechanism. And so it's time to attach that to the actuator. Screw it in. Okay, and then there's a little pin here that holds the other end of the band. Okay, so I need to get the spring, this heavy spring, into this position, and then we can open it up once it's in position. A little bit tricky. There's no perfect way to do it, but this needs to be here. What I found is that it's best to actually put it in the slot here and then work this down until this actuator is around that post. All right. Okay, can we do it? There we go. All right, we're in. All right, we're there. Just gotta kind of push everything down into place. Keeping my thumb on the spring to keep it from popping loose. Just gotta slide everything down now. Okay, the cover's back in place now, so that spring inside is captured and relatively safe. I'd like to get the band to the open position now, so without using the handguard, I'm gonna see if I can grab onto this actuator and just turn it with a good pair of pliers. Oh, there it is. It's got to find the right mechanism. So I used my just crescent wrench here to grab 2 of the sides, kind of the 2 of these pawls, and then with another pair of pliers, I just rotated these and I was able to get it to lock in the open position. So there you go, it's locked open. That's great. Only took a couple tools. I'm changing out the chain oil and gas caps for this. They were turned on with a wrench. You can tell they're all chewed up, and this one's missing the little retainer string inside. They're actually pretty tough to find because these are a little bit different from newer ones. They have, characteristic of these is that the O-ring is like underneath the head versus having an O-ring around the side. On most of the newer caps, the ring is like around the outside and it seals on the perimeter as you screw it down. This one has a more traditional O-ring underneath the head and it seals on the flat surface that it presses into. So they have different threads, they're incompatible, these are hard to find. In any case, here's the part number. It's a 545-07-08-01, and this is for specific Husqvarna 235s, 236s, 240s, between certain years, and so that's a little bit unique, but you can find them. No more leaking, no more wrench required. I'm going to put on a fresh ear cleaner, if nothing else, just to make sure that the tuning I do is appropriate for a good running saw and not maybe tuned to a bad air filter. The kit with the filter element also came with an extra primer bulb for pulling fuel through the carb, so I guess I'll go ahead and change that out as well. New primer bulb, let's see how it works. Okay, working well. One last part I'm replacing is this handguard / chain brake handle. It had a crack in it and it broke during the process of repairs. So with the clutch cover and chain brake in the open position, which it should always be when this is taken off, should be a nice, easy process of just setting it down on there and everything lines up. And I won't do it right now because I want this to be tightened on, but that would allow the chain brake to operate right now. If you take this off without the chain brake being locked open, you're in for a world of hurt. All right, so chain brake is reinstalled. Let's go ahead and put the chain back on. So what's strange about these 240s is that the tensioning is set from the cover with this little nub right here. And so when you're putting the bar onto the saw, you're not actually locating it yet. That happens when you put this on. So I'm going to pull it out and help it index into that part of the cover. What I keep checking is that the clutch cover is actually flat in this respect up against the side of the saw. You don't want to have a gap in here, and that's what happens if you're not indexed into the bar, yada yada. You know, just because we can, let's go ahead and reaffix this sticker onto here. These apparently ship from Mars, and I don't want to wait for the weeks that it would take. So I cleaned this one off, heated it up, flattened it out a little bit, and I'm going to see if I can stick it back on here. So for cleanliness sake, let's wash off the pad with some alcohol. This is just 99% isopropyl. And the back of the sticker too. And then we'll try to use some of this contact cement. If it doesn't work, no worse off than I started. All right, so now there's the surfaces nice and clean. I've had good luck with this before. It's called weld wood. It says put down a thin layer and let it dry to tacky. Okay, it's one side, and now the other side. All the way up to the edges. Oh, missed a spot. Missed 2 spots. All right, put it away before you mess it up. Believe it or not, it calls for 15 minutes minimum, but not over 2 hours of drying before you apply things. So we are there. Let's see how it goes. Oh, gotta be careful. As soon as it touches, it's ready to bond. Okay, let's use a paper towel that's clean for applying pressure. That should be it. Pretty cool. Well, I can give these back to my family member now. We had 2 successful repairs, I'm happy to say. If anybody has any questions about Husqvarnas, I can try to help. If this was helpful to you, or at least entertaining watching me flounder around, hit the like button. But in any case, thanks for watching.